All right, if we can break into your wonderful conversation, it's been, don't you think, a great gathering? Haven't our organizers done a wonderful job of bringing together practitioners, great sessions? It's really been nice, I think. And a great visit to the museum and library, and now we're going to make you sit still for another hour. But this is a discussion to talk about the different platforms that we've got, as you know. And we're going to talk not just about scale, which is where many times those conversations go, but talk about the learning that really lies behind it. I'm Diana Oblinger with EDUCAUSE. We're a higher education IT organization, and you've got a great panel here. I think we're very fortunate to have people that represent all of the different platforms. You probably know them without any introductions, but quickly, Anant. You've got Mark, you've got Melissa and Vivek, and they are representing a variety of platforms, edX, FutureLearn, we've got Canvas, and we've got Coursera. So many of you will have experience with majority of those platforms, and so we're very fortunate to have the absolute experts here. And what we're going to do is try to talk about learning more than the platforms per se. And to jump right straight into it, I think what I'd like to start out with is thinking about at least a phrase that we use, and maybe you use something different. And it's that it's not just about the technology, it's what you do with it that counts. So where I'd like to start with the panel is asking them to think about what they really want to do with their platforms in terms of the learning. And a couple of different rules. You can say something that has been said before. We had some great sessions this morning talking about learning principles, how people learn, about the students that are involved in that learning process. We also, I think, all know that what is new may actually be old, so it doesn't have to be a new theory of learning. So, Anant, maybe I can start with you and ask you, what is the theory of learning that is behind your platform?
So, when we had this discussion earlier at lunch today, the person who said this shall remain nameless, but somebody said that, MOOCs came out and there's really no model of learning that was embodied in the platform and so on and so forth. And I took violent objection to that. And I said that, but if you looked at Susan Singer's great talk this morning, she talked about a number of things that learning researchers have known for 30, 40, 50 years. And everything's been done before. So we heard about the greatness of instant feedback, about retrieval learning, about interval learning, about peer learning, about all kinds of cool stuff. And I do want to point out that in the edX platform, and this is thanks largely to my colleague Piero Mitros. Is Piero around? Oh, I'm going to beat up on him. He should be here. How could he not be? So platform does embody a key principle. And from day one, the platform embodies the concept of learning called active learning. And this really came out in the very early days from just a great paper by Craig and Lockhart in 1972, where they demonstrated that active learning really promotes retention much better than anything else. And if you say, okay, what the heck is active learning? And so it's just a simple concept where it's not just about telling people something, but it's getting people to engage in the content, to retrieve the content. Okay, so what does it mean in MOOCs? In MOOCs, it means that, very crassly put, you show somebody a video, you show them some content, then immediately following that, you have them use that information and actively engage with the content. You have a little exercise, a little quiz, or you have them engage in a discussion. So this format was key. Active learning was key to the edX platform. And in fact, from day one, even in the very first course, we had a UI element called a learning sequence that embodied this principle of active learning, so that professors, instructors who created courses had no choice but to create content that adhered to this model. So active learning was thought about from day one, and it's always been a key part of the learning process.
So Vivek, you were talking earlier about how we have different theories of learning and how maybe they're starting to blend. Tell us more about that and how you see that in your platform.
Sure. And it's great to hear Anant talk about active learning. And I'm from a background in health sciences, and we've had problem-based learning in medicine for many years. I'll date myself with this audience. I actually did my first computer program on computer-assisted learning using punch cards. Anyone know what a punch card is out there? So, we've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing this for a long time. We've been figuring out how to make it work. And I just acknowledge that the MOOCs actually are the first time that we've been able to scale it up. But my own perspective is that MOOCs really started with in educational theory, what we'd start with a objectivist approach, very sort of focused in on looking at the learner and what they could demonstrate, and concepts of mastery learning, and certainly on the Coursera platform, the early features were really built around trying to demonstrate that a learner had mastered a particular topic before they went on to the next topic. What I think is really fascinating, and we're seeing it in spades today, and hopefully we'll continue to see it tomorrow, is that we see a convergence of the many different theories of learning, and we see all of the platforms really now starting to talk about the social aspects, the group-based and collaborative-based aspects of learning, which come from the other theories.
Now, you all know that this is being taped, so everything they say, you can come back to them and be sure that they've instantiated that in their platforms in the future. Mark?
Now you tell us.
No, yeah, a little bit late into that commercial. Mark, I'm going to turn to you, because one of the things that I think you've said is that it might be a little bit different in Europe.
No, it certainly is, and I'm delighted that you brought up that private conversation. I'm also delighted how easy it is to wind you up. But actually, yeah. So we've taken a very different approach. So I think what we saw when Coursera and edX have launched is this active learning and mastery learning play out. But we have a very different approach found on what the British Open University has been pioneering for 40 years, which is about social constructivism, the fact that we learn through discussion and conversation. So conversational learning theory, sort of developed by Gordon Pask and Diana Laurillard, is a sort of core feature of the platform. That and John Hattie's work, empirical work, that showed that visible learning is really important, actually making sure that feedback is clear, you can see what progress you're making. So we've tried to embody those very deliberately in the design of a platform, and those things didn't exist. We had to start from scratch to build this, and those are embodied in certain ways. And I'm sure not everybody I know, I've spoken to a few people, are familiar, so I'll just, if you bear with me just a couple of minutes, I'll just talk about it. We don't have a forum in our platform. Because conversation and social learning is absolutely integral to the learning experience, what we have is within each step, what we call step of the course, where you can watch a video or do a discussion or anything else, there is a forum there. It's a discussion that happens right there. The idea you have that water cooler conversation where you take what you've been presented for 5 minutes in a video, but then interrogate that, draw meaning with that through discussion with the educator, but also with other students. The other thing is then having, in those steps, the ability to have active discussions around what concepts or particular abstract notions that you can have then learners engage on and discuss together. So the whole point about the way we've designed the platform is around that conversation. How do you optimize that conversation? How do you use the pedagogy of the massive, developer pedagogy of the masses that takes advantage of scale around that, and how do you get good quality feedback? So it's a very different approach. It doesn't mean that mastery learning doesn't have its role, but it's actually that people, it's a fact that we believe that coming to a shared understanding and sharing different perspectives on the same issues is a more valuable way of students engaging.
So Melissa, you come at it from a very different starting point from the LMS, which wasn't designed with a lot of pedagogy necessarily in mind. So tell us what you're doing.
Mm-hmm, sure. So with Canvas Network, we're kind of lucky because we can apply all these approaches, or hopefully we can, because we were founded on an LMS that was ideally designed to allow the instructor and the students to engage in the kind of learning environment that they felt best suited that discipline and that experience. So it's really about the flexibility in how you design your course and how you then encourage your course to design itself, which I like to believe happens in MOOCs. And so having the platform that can do that, that can have active learning, that can do a social constructivist approach, that can allow for mastery to evolve as somebody's working through that course is critical for us. It also, I think, encourages experimentation. We don't know yet what's the right way, and even if there is a right way, I would argue there isn't, but this allows for institutions to then figure out for them and for their particular disciplines and goals and projects what may best fit and what approach may best fit.
So I want to go a step deeper on this question about the learning theory. One of the things you also said that was interesting earlier is about how you're actually having to teach people a lot about how to teach. And if we just recap some of the things that were discussed earlier today, we haven't yet talked very much about practice, for example, about zone of proximal development, about non-cognitive factors. None of you has had a chance to say much about assessment yet. So what about those kinds of approaches to learning? How are those instantiated in your platforms, or are they?
So, there's just a number of techniques, and assessments are a really big part of it. And I just have to start with a story. When we launched the edX platform, this was 2.5 years ago, seems like 1,000. We taught a circuits and electronics course on the platform, and I was on a panel. And a reporter asked me the question, and they said, all this stuff is junk. I was going to use a worse word, but I haven't had enough beers yet. All this stuff is junk. You just have videos and multiple choice. What's new here? This is garbage. And I looked at him, and I smiled, and I said, you haven't taken an edX course. You haven't taken the course, have you? He said, well, not quite. And I said, it turns out that we don't have multiple choice on our platform. And so we did not implement multiple choice in our first course because there are many challenges with it. So we actually had incredible forms of assessment. We had a online virtual simulation-based circuits laboratory to enable people to design and construct things. People have said you can't teach design. Heck, we were teaching design. We had equation solvers, differential equation solvers. We had graph problems, image problems. And now we even use machine learning to have essay grading, peer grading. So just many, many, many assessment types, which are very critical. It turns out that over time, we did evolve to bring in multiple choice into the platform because many professors were porting courses from other platforms onto edX, and they had a lot of multiple choice. And they said, you mean you don't have multiple choice? What do you have? So we ended up having to include multiple choice on our platform eventually.
We're trying to make this interesting for you this evening. You can tell that. Okay, who's next? Melissa.
So yeah, thinking about that, I think it's interesting because I've taught on Coursera, actually, and I've taught for quite a while. And having to make the transition from a traditional online, if we're going to call it traditional, and even a traditional classroom setting to a MOOC setting was really challenging for me because I'm not a video lecturer. I don't get up and lecture. I never have. It's not how I've taught. I don't quiz. It's just not how I've taught. I create this sort of interactive community that allows for people to learn from one another, or at least that's what I hope I'm doing. And so thinking about that and then trying to capture that spirit and translate it into a platform was really challenging for me. And it wasn't so much about what the platform let me do or not do. It was about the coaching that came with it and how I could take my spirit and what made me, hopefully, what I think is a good instructor, become that in the MOOC environment, which is so unique and different. So I think it's less about, I would challenge it, it's less about the platform, and it's more about what you choose to do with the platform, how you capture the value that you provide as an instructor to create that kind of environment, and how you bend the platform to what you need it to do. Like the multiple choice, I'm sure was successful in that setting for those instructors. It's not something I would choose to do, but I'm sure it worked for what they were trying to do. How do you do that and make sure the platform lets you do that?
Okay.
As a reformed academic administrator, I just have to point out we never have this conversation about our campus-based courses. right? And how many of our campus-based courses use multiple choice all the time because that's what's feasible.
Right.
So, and I think it's been pointed out several times today, like our experience with MOOCs is forcing us to have conversations that's thinking about how we do this at scale that we can bring back to our campus-based sessions. And so, like, to me, it's a convergence. We started with something, but we're working towards understanding how we can actually apply it on the MOOC platforms, but then we can also bring it back right into our classrooms.
Mark, do you want to have the last word on this one?
Yeah. You wanted me to be controversial, so I have to take issue with Melissa. So
Sit next to you.
So actually, I think the platforms do have a part to play. Actually, they can be quite constraining if they are, if they don't support certain activities. So you talked about zone of proximal development. So how do we manifest that on the platform? So it's a Twitter-style setup. So you've registered your profile, you've put details about yourself, and then on our I'll call them forums for want of a better word at the moment, but in our conversation space, you can follow people. And you can follow people that you learn from the most. You can then filter the massiveness of the conversation, which is considerable on our platform, to only follow those people where you learn the most from and you have a better connection with. You can build that community. Now, I heard today from one MIT course where they're going to another forum that will enable people to vote most popular things and form a community. I think that's a testament to the fact that the platform doesn't support the kind of things they want it to do. So I think there's a really important role where the platform is co-educator with the course. They together need to work together to produce the outcome.
So we'll come back to this one at the end. I want to switch a little bit and talk about. Well, we're going to do questions when we get a little bit farther in. So question about massiveness, because one of the things many times when we talk about massive programs, there's almost an implicit assumption that one size fits all. And one of the things that I think may be very important for the people represented here, community colleges, research universities, surgeons, is context. And context can be the students that you're trying to reach, it can be the institution, it can be what skills you're trying to approach. So let me ask you all to talk about context and whether what you are using, what you've designed, is intended for a specific context, or whether it's best in one context versus another, which might help us make better decisions. Who wants to talk about context?
I'll start and say I think it's interesting because I think my opinion is these platforms weren't necessarily designed for context, but they're finding their context. I think certain types of learners and even certain types of instructors are finding themselves with certain platforms based on perhaps it's the way it's designed and where they feel comfortable in their teaching. Perhaps it's the way it's designed and where they feel comfortable in their learning. It could be the roots of the kinds of users that started on those platforms and continue to have an allegiance to those platforms and want to keep learning there. But I think there may not be intentional context designed, but context is starting to happen. So for example, in Canvas Network, we find ourselves with, I mentioned this earlier, people that want to experiment. We've had a course that was alongside a conference, and the conference was the kickoff, and then the community continued to engage in dialogue and discussion and collaboration after that conference happened. It was a learning environment. It was absolutely about the experience, but it perhaps wasn't what an initial MOOC looked like when they first started. And there's some context to that evolved in and of itself through this nature of experimentation. I'd argue a little bit that context has been coming to us, even if we haven't deliberately gone out and grabbed specific context.
Again, I'd like to harken back to Susan Singer's talk this morning, where so I'm new to thinking about education and learning about education. So I've only been teaching for about 26 years, and I really never thought about it. Never read papers about it, and I read my first paper on education 3 years ago. And certainly MOOCs has transformed my life, where we think of education as an activity for which is worth reading research papers, and there's tons of cool stuff done. And so, being a newbie to this, I listened to a lot of people, and generally they told me, learning styles are different. And and contexts are different, and courses need to be taught differently, and there's different styles and different. And so I just took it to heart. When enough people tell you something day in and day out, you assume it's true. And then today I had this epiphany this morning, and somehow there's this doubt in my mind that if you're a good teacher, you're a good teacher. If there's a good way of asking a question, it's a good way of teaching and asking. There's some fundamental principles, and then I tweeted let it go this morning, and let it go. Those three amazing words from Susan Singer. I mean, they're etched in my brain for the rest of my life, which is that everybody talks about learning styles. It doesn't matter. Let it go. And so to me, I believe that good things are just good things to do in teaching. And it doesn't matter whether you're teaching a professional ed or higher ed or high school. It doesn't matter. Good things are good. And good ways of teaching are good ways of teaching, no matter whether you're teaching sociology or differential equations or mathematics or whatever. And so I think that's something I really learned this morning, and I think I will really take it to heart.
Mark?
Yeah, I think I agree with Melissa. I think things have, by default, platforms have certain strengths right now based on their evolution, which has been limited. So our platform has probably, FutureLearn has been probably successful with humanities, social sciences, business-related courses. I know NovoEd obviously is more successful around the project base because they've built tools specifically for those kind of things. And I think for mastery learning, if you want to do that, and it's about repeating skills and driving knowledge in that, and doing that through retrieval and everything else. That's where their strength. That's where you focused. And I think, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. I think we're just on a journey. And I think what was clear today is that everybody's moving our way around social learning and how important that is. But it means it's going to manifest differently. And I think there will be natural strengths that the platforms will find, and there will be different faculties choosing different platforms for where they think they're going to get the best experience that they hope to achieve.
Just make an observation. If all MOOCs achieve is getting top research professors like Anant to read education papers, that will be a great success.
Yes.
Good is good. Good is good. Okay, so let's take a slightly different turn now. And one of the things that my colleague Malcolm Brown is engaged in and we're trying to think about is what's the next generation digital learning environment look like? We had the LMS, and it does certain things, but of course that's not the entire learning environment. MOOCs do certain things as well, but perhaps not the entire learning environment. There's an ecosystem around all of this, right? And many of you were talking about this earlier today, where you use a MOOC, but you wrap services and people around the different things that you're trying to do. So my question for the panelists is, since you know more about MOOCs than probably all the rest of us because you work with them and you deal with so many customers, what is the rest of the ecosystem that needs to encircle, envelop, complement what we currently have with MOOCs? Because a MOOC by itself may not be that entire digital learning environment.
What's LMS mean?
LMS, Learning Management System.
Thank you.
Read some
Acronyms.
education papers.
That's right. All right, Vivek, you want to go first? What about that ecosystem? Or Mark?
So maybe I'll just start by saying that I think, and this has been talked about many times, like I think the focus on MOOCs is probably not appropriate, even though I'm from a MOOC provider. Because MOOCs are just a way, I would say MOOCs are a way of scaling online education. And so I think really the question is about where the future of online tools for extending the reach of education will go. And to build on what Mark was just talking about, I think creating social interactions between learners is, from my perspective, absolutely going to be the way to go, because we know that's what works in traditional classroom settings, as well as the interaction between learners amongst themselves. And so figuring out how you do that at a large scale would be where I would see the future.
Mark, I cut you off accidentally.
No, it's fine. So the ecosystem that needs to be around MOOCs, I mean, we've taken a view that, you know, we're focused on MOOCs to be the massive, and there's a complementary system, LMS systems, that need to exist. I think the worst of the worlds would be that we try and conflate the two when they're very different animals. That doesn't mean you can't integrate MOOCs on campus. It doesn't mean that they don't have a role to play. But I think what we found, this is an anecdote, we found that what we happened at the beginning when we asked our university partners, well, what features would you want to build? What we quickly found is they were rushing towards building a new LMS system, which everybody bemoans, sorry. But they, you know, a lot of them do, you know, too many features, too many things, and I think that's probably why you came on the market. But it's, so I think what we want to stick to is massiveness, deal with the pedagogy of massive, make that useful on campus where it does have a role. But then I think there's a place where you want small group discussion, where you can facilitate that, and there's a different ecosystem, but they talk. The idea would be you have a system which is similar, because obviously you want of a seamless learner experience to make sure that the tools they get comfortable with, they want to be comfortable with in a different space. But that's a decision, you know, you can take and you can manage that. But I think that's the way I would see that.
Okay, so the future of online tools.
I'd love to add a couple of more words to that, and so the future of ecosystem and so on. I think the key here is, if I just go back to some of my own experiences, say when we started out 3 years ago, we had a set of thinking, and we thought certain things were very important. And today, merely 3 years later, we've just been absolutely astounded by the kinds of things people have done and the kind of tools that were important that we simply hadn't dreamt about when we began. And so to me, the key lesson here is that open source and openness and then creating ecosystems that enable people to experiment is absolutely critical in an area that's just so incredibly important at this time. And so, so one of the things we did was, of course, make our platform open source. And we've just been astounded at the kinds of things we've been seeing. I'll give you some examples. So a company, I saw some of the, Andrew and others from Cerigo here. They've integrated their tools into edX, and some incredible, these flashcards on steroids. I mean, just incredible stuff. They're working with the jazz appreciation course from UT Austin, where this whole idea of retrieval learning, where you keep interval learning, where you show people something at various intervals, is so critical. I didn't even dream about that stuff when our team began building a platform 3 years ago. I'll give you another example. You know, the team from, in fact, several teams around the world have been building various kinds of simulation tools that work with different kinds of you know, courses and so on, that whether it's mathematics or statistics in a public health course, that enable learners to see and really visualize how things work has been absolutely incredible. So to me, I think the number one thing is to enable experimentation. Open source is very important, certainly in these very early days of something that is so important. And discussion forums. So we thought we knew how to do discussion forums, and we use an open source forum in the early days of the first course of edX. Now, and then Berkeley built Armando Fox and team at Berkeley built another discussion forum, which is spectacular. And so we adopted that discussion forum in edX. And now some people like Piazza. So Piazza is integrated into edX. Or, you know, Stack Exchange is integrated. So different ways of integrating different kinds of fora. The people from Edcast are here. They integrated another kind of discussion forum. So I think the whole idea of thinking that you know what is right is wrong. I think what's important is to acknowledge that you don't know what is right, that experimentation is really important for education. To create an open ecosystem where people can experiment and do new things is critical. So I would say that openness and the enabling of experimentation is going to be key going forward.
And if I can just add, I think that openness extends beyond the platform to the practices that we're all discussing here. So I think about a couple of the faculty that have taught courses on our platform, where they've come back to us and said, the learning that's happened for me in this experience, in this MOOC experience, is transforming the learning that's happening back in my classroom and making that really evident and helping people reflect on that. Because for so long, for those of us, I've taught in online for 15 years, and there's so few of us that have sort of hoarded our learning experiences. And then MOOCs came out and exposed what we knew and what we didn't know, and where people were getting help and where they weren't getting help. And I think that just shows that not only should the openness extend to the platforms, but extend to the learning that's transpiring in places like this to everybody that's teaching in an online environment or an online capacity, so that they can truly learn or truly reflect on what makes them the best in that environment.
So I'll ask you all, one thing that you haven't mentioned about this ecosystem has really been a lot about student support, student success, non-academic issues. Is that part of the ecosystem as you conceptualize it?
Well, I think it is, but it's in two ways that we see it. So one is about enabling peer-to-peer support. So that's fundamental in the platform. But I think there is also, but this is where we get into business model discussions about how you then introduced real mentors outside on the platform where you can actually get paid support to do the sort of real supported learning that you want on a more one-to-one level, which is tutoring, which I know has already happened a little bit on the side with Coursera stuff, and is one of the things we're looking at. But I think it's a very important aspect if we really want to see if the learning be taken to another level.
I think the student support is key, and there again, I'll be sounding like a stuck record if I talked about open source and openness again, but I'll do it again. As an example, in terms of student support and tutoring of students, is very critical, and one of our partners is Google. And Google has a prototype. It's not on the main edX.org platform yet, but they prototyped Google Hangouts and Instant Help, where the idea is that any student should be able to punch a big help button. And when they punch the big help button, a message notification goes out to other learners on the platform saying, look, so-and-so needs help. Create an open a video chat or a other chat session, and they get to connect with each other. Then you can build a revenue model on top of that if you like, and Google built it. And again, if you'd come to us and said, we would never have thought of designing it this way, but Google did it, as part of our ecosystem of partners that are building things on edX. And so I think I totally agree with Mark here, which is that the whole idea of peer-to-peer support, and ideally in the future where we can combine this peer-to-peer support with some kind of microcurrency, where if you help another student, you get some brownie points, so that which you can cash in and sort of pay it forward, if you will. I think that combination with these technologies like what Google is developing on Open edX, I think may really hold the key to a future where student support systems can really go to the next level.
So I don't think students globally are ready to the degree that we want to implement peer-to-peer support or even peer review or peer reflection. I want it to happen so bad, but I watch situations where the way either courses are constructed or some of the ancillary tools associated with them or the credentialing that's associated with them make people uncomfortable in the peer-to-peer support and the peer review aspects of it. And I don't have an answer. I absolutely don't have an answer to that yet. But if I could think about the student support mechanisms that I would like to put in place, is to help students understand that peer-to-peer help and peer-to-peer review, those two concepts, those two practices are good for you, and that it's a win-win for everybody, and that and there are ways to engage in that to make it valuable.
Vivek, and then Mark.
I would just agree with everything that has been said so far about looking forward, but there's lots that we can look backwards on how to do scaffolding and how to set guideposts for students to find their way that we can learn from and apply within our platforms as well.
Absolutely.
I think peer review is something that we've pioneered something new on the platform, which is actually very successful, and students are valuing it. And what we find is when students go through that exercise, they're telling other students how fantastic the learning experience was and go back. And it's not compulsory. You're not forced to do umpteen reviews. You do what you want. But most people get two reviews within about 3 or 4 hours. But it's and most people will get that review. So it's really it can work. So that peer-to-peer can really actually happen. So I think there's a lot of hope on that one.
So we're talking a little bit about the future and what comes next. And we won't go into what the university of the future might look like or the future of the university, either way that you want to phrase that. But let me ask you about the research that you all are using to design the future for your companies, your platform, the way you're interacting with instructors. What's your research and what is it telling you? Who's first? Mark?
Right. I haven't gone first yet, have I? We launched in October 2013, so we're probably earlier in our level of research than others are. But what we are doing is we're focused on the pedagogy of massive. That's where we focus our efforts. Where does the massiveness of a course enhance the possibilities of learning? Where does it degrade it? And where we see, and what we're trying to do is make sure that we expose, we keep students exposed to that massiveness. We don't try and isolate them, segment them, and keep it an isolated experience. That's one of the challenges we have. So what we have spent our time doing research on, one is on some of the things I've heard today, which is on the content itself, the delivered content, what's the optimal way of doing that? Video length, we don't want people to disappear, we don't want people to be confused, we want to have a good experience when people come on. What does that look like? And we've not just looked at that from a pedagogy side, we've got lots of ex-producers from the BBC who help design courses with our partners from the storytelling point of view, from the audience point of view. So we look at it from a user experience, from a journey perspective, but also from a pedagogy perspective. So we do all the analysis around text lengths and all that kind of thing to optimize it, sort of single loop learning on courses. But then I think what we are then focused on is how do we develop new forms that will engage in that helps people engage in conversation. And that's where what we're learning is that peer review can work. We don't do assessment with it. It's about formative, and actually it does work. People do engage with it, they do enjoy it, and they value the formative assessments that they get. It's an effective tool. How do you make sure it's more effective? So we build something as an MVP, minimum viable product, and we iterate. So that's where our research is, what makes it really work. How does people engage in more conversation? How do we turn people just commenting on their own, not engaging in dialogue? How do we encourage that discussion between learners to happen? So we try new things. We introduce other features on the platform to make replies notified to learners. We help them filter conversations by people they're following and then do analysis on how that is impacting the level of conversation. So it's all around facilitating that peer-to-peer social learning is where our focus is.
I think openness and experimentation goes hand in hand in research. And edX, as a nonprofit, was founded on three major principles. One was access to education, of course, and that has to do with scale and so on. That has to do with improving the quality of education. And third is research. How do we do research and learning with this big data of learning? And quality and research go hand in hand. And so we're doing two things in terms of research. One is at edX, all our data is available so our partners get access to all the data. And one thing that we do is that we worked actively on creating metrics that make it easy for our partners to get access to the data. So right now, each of the partners can get access to the data with the click of a button. They can download the data, and we actually track the trajectory of how long it takes for them to actually get the data into a form that they can transfer, and we actually measure improvement in that. And so we really focus on making data available to the research community, and we track that as a corporate goal of edX. And so that's one thing. A lot of research is happening, and many of the papers at this conference use data from the kind of data produced by MOOCs. So we have so far produced about 3 billion records of data, and this is the big data of learning. And I think we just scratched the surface of the kinds of things that we can expect to learn from MOOCs. And whether it's the impact of the peer-to-peer learning and how when students are engaging with each other, which correlates to their success, all the way to how long should a video be. So for example, none of us knew what's the right length for a video. And so Philip Guo did research using 5 million video watching sessions on edX, and he came up with a magic number, 6. 6 minutes was the median length beyond which the students would be less engaged with video. So I think we just scratched the surface on the kinds of research that is coming out. But my hope is that over time, as people do research with this big data of learning, that we're just waiting to discover this Higgs boson of learning, and really help all of us just to learning much better.
So I'll just echo those points, and I would say Coursera is in the same place as trying to support partners in doing their research and as well as doing analytics. But I think the challenge we face right now is what we're able to do with these massive amounts of data is to look at engagement. And we really have to look for that Higgs boson of learning. I'm not aware of anyone off of any of the platforms that has actually looked at learning outcomes as opposed to engagement outcomes. And I just, we actually say the similar sorts of things, to keep your videos short, to keep people engaged, but we actually don't know about the relationship between engagement and learning. And I think that's the real place that we have to really move ahead, is to figure out what are the things that relate to learning as opposed to engagement.
Yeah, I think our particular focus, we're young in the MOOC world as well, but one of our focuses internally in the research that we're doing is on perceived learning. So what are your perceived goals coming into the course, and then checkpoints throughout that course, and then how successful did you perceive yourself in achieving those goals, right? So that's all student perception. That's not actual learning, as you're talking about, Vivek. But it is a step in that direction of, are you coming in and getting what you want from the course? And if so, why? If not, why? And so we do surveys and checkpoints and build in things to understand that perception. We did, probably a fair amount of you heard the news about the Walking Dead MOOC, the infamous Walking Dead MOOC that we offered last fall. And we did quite a bit of research around just perception. What brought you to that course? What did you want to get from that course? And one of the things that we discovered in that is that close to 90% of the learners that stayed engaged in the course. I'd say about 20% of the total enrollments in that course were people that actually stay engaged and did something as the course involved. Close to 90% of those folks reported to us that they learned something that they didn't expect that they would learn, or that they didn't want to necessarily learn. So those are the kinds of perception experiments and perception research activities that we're doing with our learners, especially since we kind of do some different fun experimental type projects on our platform.
So I'm going to turn to you all and spend a few minutes and see if you've got a question or two for our panel. Yes, sir, you were the first one up earlier. We've got a microphone coming down to you.
I can talk loud enough.
Quick question and...
Okay. Well, I suppose I haven't got that much experience, having taught for only 41 years. But it seems to me that one thing we know a great deal about, that we know works very well, and I'm now going to go from massive to micro, is that apprenticeship is an extraordinarily powerful way to do teaching. And we do it very well with our graduate students. Okay? In a place like MIT, we can pull it off because we have, for undergraduates, we only have 4 undergraduates per faculty member. But I would like to understand how it's possible, maybe these platforms or whatever, could be used to massively allow us to do apprenticeship.
Part of that would be the focus on the, so I don't have an answer to that, that's for sure. But I think part of that is the focus on the work product. So I'm a big believer, and we coach our faculty teaching on our platform, that you don't want students necessarily just to experience some content and evolve their thinking, but also to hopefully develop something or build something alongside, or work, or create a work, I like to call it a work product, as the result of the course experience. So that's a little bit of that. That's a little bit of apprenticeship. It's not true apprenticeship, but it's getting there.
Vivek, I'll let you be the second responder.
So apprenticeship, medical education is all about apprenticeship. You see one, you do one. Would you want your surgeon to learn how to do their procedure on a MOOC?
If it was effective.
If it was effective. And so maybe, the challenge goes back out to you through robotics and virtual reality. We might create those kinds of environments where people can learn to do procedures, and then that would absolutely scale up. But right now, I don't necessarily see those kinds of things happening. But problem-based learning, which is the sort of bedrock of medical education, can easily move to a MOOC type of model with groups forming and learning. So there are many forms of apprenticeship-based learning that I think could start to scale up. I think practical skills, there were some examples discussed this morning as well. As we start to create the tools for those kinds of practical skills to be done virtually, I think it could happen.
I'm going to go to the second question here.
So I teach on the Coursera platform, and I'm interested in teaching teachers to teach. And so many of us would argue that because you can drive a car, it doesn't mean you can drive a Navy destroyer, right? And so even though it's really cool and shiny and has great buttons, right? And so the piece that I wish we talked more about was how we develop ourselves as educators and as teachers. And so it's great to have these platforms, but there needs to be purposeful pedagogy behind the tools. Because otherwise, it's, you know, if you have a hammer, it all looks like a nail kind of thing. But so what are each of your platforms doing to support the person whose division director said, we need a MOOC, oh my God, we need a MOOC, everybody has a MOOC, and we're late to the game?
I'd love to jump in there first because we work, this is something that we pride ourselves on. We assign every instructor that teaches on our platform, not necessarily the lead, but the instructor that's actually going to teach on the platform, an instructional designer to work with. And we work from the very beginning with that instructor to ensure that what they're trying to accomplish is how it's being represented in their course. We even, if appropriate, engage in dialogue about do they really want to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, and then work through with them throughout the duration of the course, through to the reflection of that course and what kinds of changes would you implement after. It's a heavy burden, right? Because there's a fair amount of load in doing that, but we believe strongly that, as you said, just because you know how to drive the car doesn't mean you know how to drive the destroyer. So.
You know, I think the question is very well asked. I think the first step we need to do is, for most of us who've been teaching in person, I think teaching online is quite a bit different. And so one thing edX has done, and this is both on the platform side and also in person, is that on the platform we actually we've created a course called edX 101, which is an online course on how to teach an online course. And we have not made that into a MOOC for public access yet because there are some pieces of that which we're still trying to clear IP on. Once we do that, we'll make that a MOOC. So we do that. The second part is edX has we've invested just extremely heavily on training. And it actually turns out that we have over 105 people in edX. And the two groups are the biggest groups at edX. Our engineering team is about 40, 45 strong, and education services team is about 40, 45 strong. Significant parts of the company focused on training. And so when partners come and join us, there's a fair amount of training that goes on in terms of teaching online, video practices, best practice for a number of things. And so there's a lot of hands-on training and personal attention provided by various instruction designers and trainers. Because I think teaching the teachers is a big part of what we all have to do.
Mark, do you want to respond?
Yeah, so what we do is most of our, all of our university partners will actually are trying to build capability in-house. So most of them have a learning technologist or a team who are going to run these MOOC projects. So where we focused our energies is on training them up in what we are learning is working effectively, both from an audience perspective, but also from a learning design perspective. So all the things about video length and other things, more than that. So how the tools are being used effectively. We also have a very vibrant partnerships. Every quarter we get all the project leaders of the MOOC programs together and they give case studies. They share their best practice, what worked well, what didn't work well. We record all those. Those are all available for new partners when they join, so they can actually hear from those, and we put them in touch with new partners. And there's a lot of sharing and support going on amongst the partnership that we encourage. So and also you do get a dedicated person who is actually a producer, who not only is seeing lots and lots of courses so they understand the pedagogy sides of things, but they're also looking at the user experience. Because what we really want to build is high quality. I think that consistent high quality experience is what will eventually set university courses apart. It's where everybody has to go, everything will drive to quality, and learners will expect it over a period of time.
Sir, and then we've got a microphone there, and we'll try to get down to you, the gentleman in the front row. Okay.
Okay, so
Quick questions.
I want to follow up on two themes. One, Jerry's comment about apprenticeship, and two, the massiveness of MOOCs and how you exploit it. Obvious difference of an apprenticeship program versus a MOOC is the MOOC is pretty much broadcast, and the apprentice does stuff and then the master comments. And so my question is, how can you think of exploiting the massiveness of the MOOC? You have hundreds of students who've made exactly the same wrong answer to that problem before, and are of the same class of that student, and you know what page in the book helped them. When are you going to exploit that to make this instruction individualized based on the data mining that you can actually do in the MOOC?
That's up to the instructors.
So I could jump. First of all, on the apprenticeship, I'll jump in this time around. I really, if you look at pilots, it turns out that pilots spend 95% of their time on a flight simulator, and 5% of the time flying a plane. And so we can use, and we do so on edX. We have invested very heavily on simulation technology and game-like technology to create virtual labs in virtually every discipline: physics, mathematics, chemistry, biology, of course circuits and electronics and so on, to create these virtual labs that people can use for experimenting and designing things, getting a bit of the apprenticeship model into the picture. To your second part of the question, which is how do we learn from the past? Again, as part of the open source community, we are hearing of a number of experiments going on, and the one that I love the most is what a team has created, which is not part of the platform yet, but I hope will be very soon one day, is a hinting framework. What they use is a crowdsourced hinting platform, where what students do is that you get an answer wrong, you get an answer wrong, you get an answer wrong, you finally get an answer right. At that point, a team has developed. Up pops the dialog box and says, "What hint at this point would have helped you in your quest?" And so that student can type in a hint. And if enough people type in the same hint, then you crowdsource the hint. It must have been a good hint, and now you can provide that hint to students. And so you're crowdsourcing and learning from the students who are learning these things. And that's been done as part of the platform. It's not part of the product yet, but hopefully one of these days.
And that's where the fact that I think all of our platforms are open is really beneficial, because assuming that tool is a tool that can be easily integrated in another open environment, right, with APIs and so forth, and LTI, exactly, we can all benefit from that. So I would almost argue, as long as the platform is a successful open platform that you're working with, it's what are those tools out there that you want to engage in that particular environment?
Okay, we've got a question back here, and very quickly one in the front, and then we're going to wrap up. We got more questions than we've got time, so we had a woman here.
Okay,
please.
Thank you. So my question is on what you just said about looking at the past. So I'm at an institution, and there are a lot of us who have been involved in online education since the beginning of online education. And we are so excited to be part of the MOOC experiment and the scale. But we also get frustrated because we see a lot of lessons being learned again. Things like how long should a video be? We could have told you that 10 years ago. Yeah. And it's frustrating to not feel like the two communities, the experienced and the newer, are engaging as much as they could be, so that we can really do some innovative, cool things that we are doing, but maybe even faster. And so I wonder if you have ideas for how, in a platform-independent way, we could better make sure that we understand all the lessons already learned in online education and really work together to do some exciting things.
And I hear that more as a call to action for the community rather than something we necessarily can answer right at this minute. So, sir, I'll let you have the final question here.
Thank you. So my question is actually about, relative to your platform, about mobile. And in our work, I've seen organizations think about mobile in like 4 different categories. So one is they ignore it. The second is they treat it as a screen size, and they'll make the site change based off the screen size. The third is it's treated as a device. So there's different use cases. So it'll be interactive around maybe instead of just watching a video, you could record a video response, or you have GPS and you can have a meetup, or there's some sort of device specific, using other controls. And then kind of the fourth or the highest form of thinking about mobile is a behavior. A student that's on a train, they're commuting, they have 20 minutes. How do you think about what they're trying to achieve in that context? And I'm curious, with your platform today and where you see it going, how do you think about mobile and where are you at on that spectrum?
So we built FutureLearn mobile first. So it's entirely responsive design. Every course will work on a smartphone, a tablet, or the desktop. Because we anticipated that that was going to be important for future, certainly for developing world markets where that mobile access is all important. And we find routinely 20% of learners are engaging on the courses through their mobile device. So it's something we took very seriously. And that's why, on our quizzes or tests, you only have one question per page. So you don't have to scroll all the way down. You can easily just click an answer, press on, move on. So that's the way it works. So we thought about that.
So we certainly feel, at edX, the mobile is extremely important, and we did mobile second, and so it's extremely important of the 1,000 positions it could be in. The many benefits to mobile. So, for example, we are partnered with Facebook. They have a lot of experience with mobile, and their Facebook is integrating some of the discussion forum activities in a way that students can engage with each other through a mobile platform using various Facebook technologies and so on. But frankly, I'm in two minds, and I'd love help here. Love to ask the community, what do you think? One of the challenges with mobile is exactly what my friend Mark said, which is it forces you into a kind of learning. It sort of steers you into multiple choice in many cases, where I have two fat thumbs, and it's hard for me to do the kind of online apprenticeship types of laboratories where I'm doing very interesting interactions for many things. Now, I can imagine many areas where mobile is perfectly fine, but other areas where it's very challenging. And so, at least for the foreseeable future, I see a blend of mobile and some richer interactive device. But I'm happy to learn if people think that there's a way of doing everything in mobile, love to go all mobile.
Vivek?
Just to close off on that one, because I think you actually described several very different use cases. Learner in this neighborhood that wants to watch on the train versus someone whose only way to access the internet is through a mobile device. Those are two very different learners, and what we have to do through the mobile platforms are going to be very different sorts of features for those different kinds of learners. And maybe just to close off, because I know we're coming to the end of time, I think a common theme throughout the day has been we talk about MOOCs as these homogeneous sorts of things. They're actually very heterogeneous in terms of what the platforms do, what the institutions who are working with us want to do, and what the learners who are ultimately receiving those courses want to achieve. They're not all the same. And I think I would disagree with the one-size-fits-all kind of philosophy that somehow started the permeation today. I think what MOOCs let us do is actually reach different learners in different ways, in the way that they can most benefit.
So the hour has absolutely flown by. I want to close with 3 quick thoughts that at least I'm taking away from the conversation. The first one is what you think is right is wrong. And that if we have experimentation, we have open platforms, we will be able to create what is right, even if we started out in perhaps the wrong place. The second one is that it's not just about the course or the platform, it's the coaching that goes with it. Someone used the term purposeful pedagogy, and what you choose to do with a platform and how we help each other understand what's best to use the platform for and for the learners is another critical point. And then lots of the great things to look forward to in terms of the future of online tools. You've heard about social interaction, the pedagogy of massive peer-to-peer learning, micro-credentialing, hinting framework, perceived learning. So I hope if there's the opportunity to return to share our thoughts, we will be able to come back at some point in the future and realize that all of those things about the future have actually become reality, and that it is very much about how we serve learners. So I will turn it back over to our host for the evening for any final instructions, and I do want to thank the panelists. I thought they were very lively and very